My dad didn't mean to leave the line open. I'd called from my grandmother's kitchen, asking about a small piece of paperwork, when the rustle of his jacket came through, followed by my mother's voice, and then his. Clear as day. She's a burden. Always has been. I froze, hands still on the drawer I'd been searching. There was no hesitation in his voice, no warmth, just cold annoyance. My dad didn't mean to leave the line open. But hearing the truth when people think you aren't listening changes everything. Drop a yes in the comments if you've ever overheard a conversation about yourself that you wish you hadn't. The next morning, the letter was waiting for me. A single sheet of heavy cream-colored paper sitting in the exact center of my desk at the warehouse. The air in the facility was already thick with the smell of ozone and metal dust, the hum of the industrial cooling units vibrating through the floorboards. But my office was quiet. Too quiet. I picked up the paper. It was typed formal, devoid of any personal signature. Dear Olivia, it began. Not Liv, not daughter. Just Olivia. It informed me that due to strategic restructuring, my position as head of logistics was being dissolved, effective immediately, and my presence at the upcoming shareholder retreat, the one I had been organizing for 6 months, was no longer required. Tears would have been inefficient. Screaming would have been a waste of calories. I simply sat down in my ergonomic chair and read it again. Strategic restructuring. That was code. It meant my father Thomas and my brother Brandon had finally decided they didn't need me looking over their shoulders anymore. They wanted my labor, but they didn't want my voice. They wanted the logistics to run perfectly, but they didn't want the person who made it happen. It was a firing disguised as a business pivot. A disowning wrapped in corporate letterhead. I looked at the succulent on the corner of my desk. It was the only living thing in this steel and concrete box. I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was the calm of a mechanic realizing the engine isn't broken, it's just missing a part. And then I realized I was the part. But not the part they thought I was. They thought I was just the daughter they could discard. They forgot I was also the guarantor. I turned to my computer. The screen glowed blue in the dim office. I navigated to the surety insurer's portal. 2 years ago, when the company was bidding on a $4.5 million government contract for cooling systems, our credit rating wasn't enough. Thomas had leveraged everything. Brandon had no assets. So they came to me. It's just a formality, Liv, my father had said. We just need a guarantor with a spotless record to back the bond. I signed. I signed because I thought it was what families did. I signed because I thought it bought me a seat at the table. I logged in. My name was there, listed as the sole guarantor for the surety bond. The bond that was the legal requirement for every single government contract currently active on the warehouse floor. Without that bond, the contracts were void. Immediate default. I moved the cursor to the withdraw guarantee button. It wasn't a complicated process. It didn't ask for a reason. It just asked for confirmation. I clicked. Are you sure you want to withdraw your personal guarantee? The screen asked. This may result in immediate contract termination. I didn't hesitate. I clicked yes. A loading bar spun for 3 seconds. Then a green checkmark appeared. Withdrawal processed. Notice of bond cancellation sent to contracting officer. It took 6 minutes. 6 minutes to dismantle the safety net I had spent 2 years holding up. I stood up. I took the succulent. I took my framed logistics degree off the wall. I left my access badge on top of the letter. I walked out of the office past the rows of inventory I had organized, past the forklifts I had scheduled, and out into the parking lot. The sun was shining indifferent and bright. Inside the system, the clock was ticking down to a freeze that would stop everything cold. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to fix it. People often ask how someone smart enough to manage a multi-million-dollar supply chain could be stupid enough to sign a personal guarantee for $4.5 million. It's a fair question. On paper, it looks like insanity. But abuse in high-functioning families doesn't look like abuse. It looks like teamwork. It looks like being the only adult in a room full of children who happen to be wearing expensive suits. You don't jump into a pot of boiling water. You sit in a cool pot while someone slowly turns up the gas. They call it the boiling frog syndrome. For me, the water started getting warm 10 years ago. My brother Brandon was the visionary. In our family business, visionary is a code word for incapable of execution. Brandon was the one with the big ideas about pivoting to smart home tech or rebranding our fleet or buying a warehouse we didn't need because he liked the architecture. While Brandon was having visions, I was having panic attacks over shipping manifests. I was the one renegotiating fuel surcharges to save us 12% on freight. I was the one firing the vendor who was padding invoices. I was the one making sure the visionary didn't accidentally bankrupt us by ordering 3,000 units of obsolete inventory. And every time I fixed a disaster, my father Thomas would pat me on the shoulder and say, "Good catch, Liv. You keep the lights on so Brandon can build the future." I heard "good catch." I didn't hear the second part. I didn't hear that I was just the utility company for Brandon's ego. 2 years ago, the water started to boil, but I was so used to the heat I didn't even flinch. We were bidding on the government contract. It was huge. It was going to put us in a different tax bracket, but our liquidity was low because Brandon had burned through the operating capital on a failed expansion into solar panels. The bank wouldn't underwrite the surety bond without a guarantor who had spotless personal credit and liquid assets. Brandon's credit score was a joke. So they called me into the conference room. It wasn't a request, it was a coronation. My father sat at the head of the table looking tired, looking old. He told me I was the only one who could save the deal. He told me this was my moment to step up to show that I wasn't just a manager but a partner. "It's just a signature, Liv," he had said, sliding the document across the mahogany table. "It's a formality. We'll refinance in 6 months and take you off." I looked at my mother, Susan. She was sitting in the corner, smiling that tight, anxious smile of hers. "Do it for your father," she had whispered. "He's so stressed. Be the good one, Olivia." Be the good one. That was the hook. That was the trap. I signed because I had been conditioned for 29 years to believe that my value was measured by how much stress I could absorb for them. I thought I was signing a partnership agreement. I thought I was buying respect, but I wasn't. I was just insuring their recklessness. I was the insurance policy they didn't have to pay premiums on. I drove away from the warehouse, watching the industrial park fade in my rearview mirror. I realized then that I hadn't just walked out of a job. I had climbed out of the pot. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't burning. I was cold, sharp, and terrifyingly awake. The frog wasn't boiled. She was just done. 36 hours. That's how long it takes for a federal bureaucracy to process a surety withdrawal and issue a notice of non-compliance. It's a terrifyingly efficient system when it wants to be. I was sitting on a park bench 3 miles from the warehouse watching a woman throw a frisbee to a golden retriever. The dog didn't care about profit margins or bonding capacities. It just wanted the plastic disc. It was the most honest transaction I'd seen in years. Then my phone started to vibrate against the metal slats of the bench. It wasn't a ring, it was a seizure. The screen lit up with notification after notification, scrolling so fast the names blurred into a single stream of panic. First came the automated alerts. Surety status revoked. Contract number 88902 suspended. Compliance alert, immediate action required. Then came the humans. Thomas called first. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail immediately. I pressed play, holding the phone away from my ear, as his voice, tinny and distorted, cut through the park's quiet. "You think you can just walk away. You think you can sabotage this family. I'm talking to legal. You get back here and sign the reinstatement, or so help me God, Olivia, I will sue you for every dime you've ever made. You are destroying this company." He didn't ask why. He didn't ask if I was okay. He went straight to the threat. It was the reaction of a man who realized his favorite tool had just broken in his hand. Then came Brandon. His text popped up in rapid-fire blue bubbles. "What did you do? The site super just called. They shut down the job. Everything is frozen. You're hysterical. You're ruining my deal because you got your feelings hurt. Grow up. Fix this. Now." My deal. Not our company. His deal. Even in the middle of a catastrophe, his ego was the biggest thing in the room. Then the phone rang again. "Mom?" I stared at the screen. Susan was the peacemaker, the smoother of ruffled feathers, the one who whispered, "Be the good one," while the house burned down. I answered. I didn't say hello. I just listened to her breath hitch on the other end. "Olivia," her voice was trembling high and thin. "Olivia, honey, please. Your father is..." He's grabbing his chest. "He's so red in the face. You're hurting him. You're hurting his heart." "I'm not doing anything, Mom," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat, calm, detached. "I'm just sitting in a park." "You have to fix this," she pleaded. "Just sign the paper. Just make it go away. We can talk about the letter later. We can fix the misunderstanding. But you can't leave us exposed like this. It's not right. Think about the family. I am thinking about the family, I said. I'm thinking that the family fired me yesterday. That was just business, she stammered. It wasn't personal. But this is personal, Liv. You're attacking us. I hung up. The realization hit me harder than the insults. They weren't panicking because they missed me. They weren't calling because they were worried I was hurt or sad or lost. They were panicking because the roof was caving in and I was the only pillar that could hold it up. They missed the safety net. They missed the insurance policy. I looked back at the dog. It had caught the frisbee. It was happy. I turned my phone to Do Not Disturb. The screen went dark. The vibrations stopped. Across town, in the steel and concrete box of the warehouse, I knew the alarms were still ringing. But here in the park, it was quiet. And for the first time in 29 years, the noise wasn't my problem. Going back to the park wasn't an option. Going home to cry was a luxury I couldn't afford. I drove straight to a brick building in the financial district, took the elevator to the 14th floor, and walked into the office of the only person I knew who loved spreadsheets more than I did. Chloe looked up from her triple monitor setup. She didn't ask why I was there in the middle of a workday or why I looked like I'd just dismantled a bomb. She just pointed to the empty chair and spun a fresh legal pad across her desk. "You did it," she said. It wasn't a question. "I did it," I replied. I pulled a flash drive from my pocket. And now I need to know what I walked away from. We spent the next 4 hours building a fortress out of paper and pixels. We drafted a formal notice of liability withdrawal, stripping away any emotion from the language, until it was just a cold, hard legal fact. Then we opened the books. I had been keeping a shadow archive for 6 months, a digital mirror of the company's finances that I updated every time Mason or my father locked me out of a system. I thought I was protecting them from an audit. I realized now I was gathering evidence for an autopsy. Chloe worked with the precision of a surgeon. "Let's look at the operating budget," she murmured, her fingers flying across the keyboard. If they were desperate enough to fire the guarantor, they must have thought they had a cash injection coming from somewhere else. Or they're just bleeding out and didn't know it. She pulled up the vendor payments log. It was a mess of legitimate expenses mixed with vague rounded numbers that made my accountant's brain itch. "Stop," I said, pointing at the screen. "Scroll back. What is Apex Strategy Group?" "Consulting fees," Chloe read. "Billed monthly. 3 payments of $9,500, totaling $28,500. I stared at the entry. Apex Strategy Group. I knew that name. It wasn't a firm. It was the name of the fantasy football league my brother Brandon ran with his fraternity brothers. The room seemed to tilt. $28,500. I remembered a meeting 3 months ago. I had fought tooth and nail with a freight carrier to shave $500 off a shipping container fee. I had stayed late, reworked routes, and argued until my voice was hoarse just to save the company pennies. My father had lectured me about watching the margins. And all the while, Brandon was writing checks to his friends for strategy. "That's not consulting," I said, my voice ice cold. "That's theft. He's siphoning operating capital into a shell account." Chloe looked at me, her expression grim. "Liv, this isn't just bad management. This is embezzlement. And if this is what they put in the vendor log where you could see it, imagine what they put in the shareholder records where you couldn't." She highlighted the rows in bright red. The screen glowed like a warning light. "Keep digging," I said. "I want to see everything." The shift happened then. The last vestige of the daughter who wanted to save the family business died in that chair. I wasn't a family member anymore. I wasn't even a former employee. I was a plaintiff, and I was looking at a crime scene. Chloe didn't stop at the vendor logs. She had the scent of blood now. She minimized the operating budget and pulled up the capitalization table, the holy grail of who owns what. "I need to check your equity position," she said, tapping a key. "If they were siphoning cash, they might have tried to dilute your shares to cover the tracks." I nodded. I owned 15% of the company. It was part of my compensation package, 3 years ago, sweat equity, for negotiating the original fleet lease. It wasn't much compared to my father's 60% or Brandon's 25%, but it was mine. It was the only thing that made me a partner and not just an employee. The screen refreshed. Chloe frowned. She leaned closer, her eyes scanning the lines. Then she stopped. She didn't look at me. She just turned the monitor so I could see. "Look at the entry from 8 weeks ago," she said softly. I looked. There it was. Transaction type stock transfer. Asset class. Class B, Non-Voting Shares, Volume 15%, from Thomas Vance to Brandon Vance. Notation gift, prenuptial asset transfer. I blinked. I read it again. It didn't say from Olivia. It said from Thomas. He retitled your shares, Chloe whispered. He moved them back into his name administratively, then gifted them to Brandon. 8 weeks ago. The room went dead silent. That's my equity, I said. That's my 15%. Not anymore, Chloe said. According to this, Brandon owns 40% now. You own 0. They stripped you of your ownership 2 months before they fired you. The puzzle pieces slammed together with a violence that made me nauseous. The restructuring letter wasn't a sudden decision. It was the final item on a checklist. They had stolen my shares to boost Brandon's portfolio before his wedding, a wedding gift paid for with my sweat. They waited 8 weeks to fire me because they needed to make sure the transfer cleared compliance. And the whole time, I was still the guarantor on the surety bond. I was personally guaranteeing $4.5 million of debt for a company I no longer owned a single brick of. How Chloe asked, her voice tight with disbelief. How did they think this would end? Did they think you wouldn't notice? Did they think you'd just keep signing the loans forever? Yes, I said, and suddenly I understood. It's called the delusion of the empty throne. To a narcissist like my father or an entitled prince like Brandon, people aren't people. We are appliances. We are toasters. You don't ask the toaster for permission to unplug it. You don't wonder if the toaster has feelings about being moved to the garage. You just expect it to toast bread whenever you push the lever down. They didn't think I would check the books because appliances don't audit their owners. They didn't think I would withdraw the bond because appliances don't have agency. They thought the throne, the seat of power in my own life, was empty. They thought they could sit in it whenever they wanted. They didn't think I was a partner, I said, standing up. They thought I was furniture. I looked at the red text on the screen. The theft was so arrogant, so sloppy, so sure of my submission. Print it, I said. Chloe hit the button. The printer whirred to life. What are you going to do? She asked. They want a meeting, I said. They want me to come back and fix the bond. They think I'm just acting out. They think if they yell loud enough, the toaster will start working again. I picked up the stack of papers. They were warm. I'm going to show them what happens when the appliance shorts out the whole damn house. Thomas demanded the meeting at the warehouse. Of course he did. It was his kingdom, his stage. He wanted the home field advantage. He texted me the time 10 a.m. with the same presumptive authority he used to order parts. Bring the reinstatement forms. We're settling this. I didn't reply. I just showed up. The warehouse was freezing. The heating units, the ones I had scheduled for maintenance 3 weeks ago, were offline because no one had approved the work order after I left. The air smelled of stale coffee and impending failure. Thomas and Brandon were sitting at the metal conference table, flanked by the company's general counsel, a man named Greg, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. When I walked in, I wasn't alone. Chloe stepped in beside me, carrying a thick red binder. She set it on the table with a heavy thud that echoed in the cold room. Who is this? Thomas barked, standing up. This is a family meeting, Olivia. Get her out. This is my forensic auditor, I said, taking a seat. I didn't take off my coat. I wasn't staying long enough to get comfortable. And this isn't a family meeting. It's a deposition. Brandon scoffed, leaning back in his chair with a smug grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. You're really dragging this out, aren't you? Just sign the bond, Liv. You made your point. You want a raise. Is that it? You want an apology. I don't want your money, I said calmly. And I certainly don't want your apologies. They bounce harder than your checks are about to. I opened the red binder. 2 days ago, I withdrew my guarantee because I was fired, I said, sliding a document across the table. Yesterday, I audited the books because I was curious. Thomas glanced at the paper. It was the vendor log, the highlighted rows of payments to Apex Strategy Group. $28,500 in embezzlement, I said. Funneled to Brandon's friends. That's a felony, by the way. Piercing the corporate veil. Brandon's grin vanished. I have the invoices, Chloe cut in her voice, pleasant and sharp. They're for strategic visioning. Curiously, the dates align perfectly with your fraternity's alumni trip to Cabo. Thomas turned to Brandon, his face reddening. But I wasn't done. But that's just petty theft, I continued. The real crime is on page 4. I flipped the page, the stock transfer record, the theft of my 15%. You stole my equity, I said to Thomas. I looked him dead in the eye. You transferred my shares to Brandon 8 weeks ago. You fired me from ownership before you fired me from the job. You had me personally guaranteeing $4.5 million of debt for a company I didn't even own anymore. The silence in the room was absolute. The hum of the broken heater was the only sound. Thomas looked at the paper, then at me. He didn't look ashamed. He looked annoyed that he'd been caught. It was estate planning, he grunted. We were consolidating assets for the wedding. You were going to get it back eventually. You're overreacting. It's securities fraud, I corrected. And bank fraud. Because you failed to notify the lender of a change in significant ownership. You destroy us, you destroy yourself, Brandon spat, slamming his hand on the table. You're still liable for the old debt. Actually, no, I said. I stood up. Because when I found the fraud, I didn't just print it. I reported it. Thomas went pale. The government contracting officer, I said. And the bank's fraud department. They have the full file. The embezzlement, the equity theft, the unauthorized transfers. The bond wasn't pulled because of a dispute, Dad. It was pulled because this company is now a criminal enterprise. Thomas looked at the red binder like it was a bomb. He realized finally that the appliance had shorted out the house. Elena, please, he whispered. It was the first time I'd ever heard him beg. We can fix this. We can undo the transfer. I walked to the door. I paused my hand on the cold metal handle. You left a voicemail telling me we're done, I said without turning around. I'm just agreeing with you formally. I walked out into the sunlight. Behind me I heard the shouting start, but it sounded distant like noise from a television in another room. I got into my car, checked my mirrors, and drove away. The collapse wasn't an explosion, it was a suffocation. Without the surety bond, the government contracts were voided within 48 hours. Without the government revenue, the bank called the operating loan. Without the operating loan, the payroll bounced. Thomas tried to sue me, of course. But Chloe's red binder had done its work. His lawyer took one look at the evidence of securities fraud and told him to settle or prepare for federal prison. Thomas chose the settlement. He sold the warehouse, his kingdom of steel and concrete, for pennies on the dollar to a competitor just to cover the legal fees. Brandon didn't get off so easily. The consulting fees triggered an IRS audit. Last I heard, he was facing 3 counts of wire fraud. The visionary finally got his own deal, but it was a plea bargain. As for me, I didn't celebrate their downfall. I didn't watch the news. I was too busy building. I rented a small office in the arts district. It has brick walls, big windows, and a heating system that actually works. On the door in matte black lettering, it says Anchor and Flame Supply Chain Consultancy. The name is a reminder. You need an anchor to hold you steady, but sometimes you need a flame to burn away the rot so you can move. I sat at my new desk, a desk I bought with my own money, and looked at the succulent I'd rescued from the warehouse. It had grown 2 new leaves. People talk about revenge like it's a weapon you fire at someone else. But I've realized that's the wrong way to look at it. There is a concept called the justice of the sower. It means that true justice isn't about salting the earth of your enemies, it's about taking your seeds and planting them in your own garden. I didn't destroy my family's business. I simply stopped laboring in their field. I stopped watering their weeds. I took my labor, my talent, and my water, and I poured them into my own soil. The fact that their field withered without me wasn't an act of aggression, it was just the natural consequence of their neglect. I struck a match. The sound was sharp and clean in the quiet office. I lit a candle on the windowsill. The flame danced bright and alive. I wasn't the invisible backbone anymore. I wasn't the safety net. I was the architect of my own life. And the view from here was beautiful. If you've ever had to burn a bridge just to keep yourself warm, share this story. You are not destructive. You are just finally surviving. Follow for more stories of reclaiming your life.